Good morning. We are so thrilled to be able to be back here in person in Binghamton. It's been a very long time. We're thrilled to be able to put on Tier Talks right in front of people, and it is so terrific. And the weather is actually fairly nice, so we'll take that. So what is Tier Talks? Tier Talks was invented back in 2015 at Homecoming. It's talks that inspire, educate, and resonate. And I think we have a program that will suit that beyond all expectations. We have a really great program today. Speakers for Tier Talks are typically from Binghamton, more often than not, either students or faculty or alumni. More often than that is alumni by the largest population. And we have three excellent alumni speakers here today. So this is going to be a great addition to our legacy of Tier Talks. I don't want to eat too much more of our time because we have a lot of great topics to go through here. So I'm going to hand it off to Steve Sieverstad. Steve, take it away.
And so the way that we decided to organize it would be to look at social media influencers and what they do to build brands and to grow businesses, looking at it on the nonprofit side, the pro-social, volunteer engagement, and using it for purposes that we would consider things that would be helping our world to be a better place. And then stepping back to take a 30,000-foot view, looking at the collective work of all these people who are influencers, whether it's for-profit or just for purposes of good, and see what is happening across the larger landscape. And then what does tomorrow's influencer look like? Because social media are always changing, and so the platforms we're on today may still be the platforms we're on tomorrow, but there could be some different ones, and like anything else, sometimes things drop out of the landscape. So we'll take a look at where the ball could be going and not just where it is today. So each presenter is going to be delivering a Tier Talk of about 15 minutes or so, and following the third of the three Tier Talks, we will take questions from you in the audience, so feel free to ask your questions then. This will be a fun hour, and it'll be a fast hour, so we're going to dive in. I'm excited to have all the three speakers here on the stage with me. It'll be a great program. So now our first speaker is Chris Strub, who graduated from Binghamton in 2007. He's one of the most wired people I know, and I don't mean in energetic, although he's very energetic, but wired. And he's on every social media platform possible, and I think is probably secretly trying to invent a platform. And he's just written a book, 15 Seconds of Fame, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. And I can't wait to dive in and start reading it. I got a copy of it last night. And I tried to go to bed early so I could be energetic for today, so I haven't had a chance to look at it. Several years ago, Chris engaged in an effort called Team Strub, and this was a 50 states tour engaging in a different volunteer effort, many of them organized around youth, and stopping in a different state along the way and engaging in volunteer efforts and documenting the whole thing. And I think you were the first Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, something in all 50 states. I guess you'll clarify the record on that, but very, very active, generating a ton of content, and not just to get his own name out there, but for the benefit of the different charities who got a lot of visibility from the effort. So enough of me, I toss it to Chris now, who will go ahead and get us started. Give a Binghamton welcome to Chris. He came all the way from South Carolina.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you again, Steve, Dana, for the great introduction. And like you said, it really is an honor. This is my first time being back up on a stage since before the pandemic began back in March 2020. So it's kind of great to see some smiling faces here on campus. Great to be back. So again, thank you so much. So let's dive right into it. Like Steve said, we're going to start out a little bit by disambiguating what exactly is, how do we define a social media influencer? Because I do think, like you said, everybody in this room defines a social media influencer differently. And with the help of some familiar faces here, we'll take a look and say, back in my day, there was really only one social media influencer. I got some chuckles. That was Tom from MySpace. That was before the days of Facebook. Everybody wanted to be Tom's friend, of course. But when Facebook started, and to give you a bit of how old I am here, actually the oldest of our three panelists this morning, which is the first time that's ever happened to me. Facebook was invented while I was an undergrad. So we've really had this big onset of social media influencers and development over the last 15 years. And I would say the first thing I think of when you think of social media influencers might be celebrities. Maybe these guys look familiar. Well, maybe the ClickShare screen looks familiar. Well, it's a picture of Billy Baldwin and Paul Reiser. Do we know who those folks are? Binghamton alums, right? So we would all recognize those fellas from being on our silver screens, might be on TV. I know my mom watched Mad About You every single night, right? So those folks certainly would identify as social media influencers with their respective audiences. A celebrity, though, is a really antiquated way, I think, of defining what a social media influencer is, right? These guys may have started their own social media channels because of what they were provided from their appearances on their shows, right? A second definition of a social media influencer might be someone with a whole lot of followers. So here again are a couple of familiar faces that have once again disappeared from our screen. It's a disappearing act, so we'll use the space here and we'll enjoy. We had Jenna Wolfe, Binghamton alum, and Ingrid Michelson, each themselves with hundreds of thousands of followers on their Twitter and Instagram platforms. But for my money, Steve, social media influencers, it's really not a definition of being a celebrity or the number of followers that you have, so to me, a social media influencer is anyone who's earned the trust of their audience through their expertise. These are 3 examples of social media influencers in my life who you might not recognize. In fact, I would bet that you don't. There's Tiffany Lanier on the left. She started a civic-minded social media organization called I Can't Wait to Vote in 2020, starting in Florida to get younger people to get out and vote. My friend JMatt MKE in Milwaukee is a TikTok influencer who has done 25 push-ups a day for the last 750 days to raise awareness for suicide prevention awareness. And on the right there is a chiropractor. She is in fact my chiropractor. Her name is Dr. Molly Spahn, and she influences me through her expertise in the chiropractic field. And so for each one of us in this room, our perspective on who social media influencers are is going to be totally different. We might see those celebrities, we might see those folks with a lot of followers as social media influencers. But depending on who you are, what your perspective is, where you come from, what your interests are, your view of social media influencers are going to be very different. So let's dive into, Armand, 3 harsh realities about social media influencers, right? The age of celebrities as we know it is over. This was the television that I used to watch when I was a kid. How many of you guys remember a TV that looked something like this? Where you had to sort of turn the dial to change the channel. There were 7 or 8 channels, and those were the celebrities. Those were your influencers. You had a very limited number of people that you could pick from to watch on TV, or you could turn the TV off. And now in 2021, nobody's seen a TV like that in ages. There are dozens and dozens of social media platforms themselves that each one of them has thousands of influencers of their own that you can pick from, that you can go on and select and enjoy who you enjoy hearing from. So this massive fragmentation of the industry has really led to this wide disambiguation. What is a social media influencer? How do we define it? Anybody recognize the faces on this screen? Do you know any of them? Who's the guy on the right? Who's the one on the left?
I don't remember his name.
She doesn't remember his name.
No, I don't.
That's Charlie D'Amelio. The one in the middle is Charlie D'Amelio.
The one in the middle is Charlie D'Amelio, right, from TikTok. He's got 125
I
million.
have teenage girls. So.
Gotcha. He has teenage girls. So the guy on the left is Ninja. He is the #1 most followed Twitch streamer. He has 17 million followers on Twitch. And then the gentleman on the right, anybody got it?
Mr. Beast.
It's Mr. Beast, right. 71 million subscribers on his YouTube channel. And these are just the top representatives on each of these platforms. For each one of those platforms and some of the other ones that my friends up here will talk about as we go on today, there are thousands more influencers that you can tune into and subscribe to, where you can't just say these are the specific set of social media influencers that exist. And these platforms themselves have exploded over the last decade. Twitch had 17 billion hours of watch time in 2020, which was up almost 100% from 9 billion in 2019. TikTok has 700 million monthly active users, and YouTube has, I think it's 71 million channels that you can select from on YouTube. Could you imagine having 71 million dials that you could turn to on your TV growing up? And of those 71 million channels, more than 23,000 of them have more than 1 million subscribers themselves. So when you talk about a mega influencer, you find someone with 1 million subscribers, Steve, there's 23,000 of those that you could pick from on YouTube alone. And every day that number continues to grow. And so I really want to remind you that your follower count really doesn't matter. Anybody recognize this gentleman? Dr. Stenger just talked about him. This is our buddy Stanley Whittingham, right? Our Nobel Prize winning professor. And for the fun of it, I looked up probably the brightest man, one of the brightest men in the country on social media, and I found out that he doesn't even have a cover photo on his Twitter account. He has tweeted a total number of 4 times, and he has 75 followers. So, Stan, you can take your Nobel Prize. I've got about 1,000 times more Twitter followers than you do. So take that, buddy. So, but again, I think the lesson here is that when you look at an influencer, when you look at any account on social media, I largely encourage you to ignore their follower count and look instead at the quality of the content and the value that they're providing to you as a viewer, as a subscriber. Right, anybody know who this is? It's on the screen. It's Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. And he says, it's not the number of followers you have or the number of likes that you get, it's the strength of your bond with your followers. I was going to have the screen right in front of me. It's over there now. That indicates how much anyone cares about what you have to say. In this game, the one with the most real relationships wins. And that's the real power of social media. And I'm going to talk in a minute here about a little bit more about myself and how I've grown in the social media industry over the years. But it's about those real relationships that you develop. And our topic today was about social media influencers reaching the masses. Social media influencers reaching the masses. And I'm here to tell you that reaching the masses is not and has not been for at least a decade a reasonable objective to try and follow. Reaching the masses, if you go into a meeting about social media, I'm sure these guys would agree and say, hey, I want to reach the masses, you get laughed out of the room. A big part of becoming a social media influencer is identifying your specific audience and developing content and engaging and building relationships with those people that want to engage with you. So this is Mark Schaefer. He's the author of a fantastic book called Known. He's a good friend of mine. He's based down in Tennessee. And Mark says in his book, the lesson here is that there's no universal answer to the question, how big does my audience need to be? It depends on who you need to connect with and what you want to achieve. Life is a long path. You meet a lot of different people along the way. Maybe all you need is one follower if it's a person who will change the course of your life. And I've followed that mantra to a T over the years. I don't have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. I go out and I speak on stages. I go out and do the work that I do that I'm going to touch on here in the next couple slides. Because when I get a chance to connect with you in person, when I get a chance to meet you here on campus, I want to impact your life. Even if the tech's not working and I got to go first. But I want my work and what I do on social media to impact who you are. Nothing about changing the masses. So this is how I've tried to take on working in the social media industry since I graduated back in 2007 as the Giving Day guy. There's a photo of me working at a fundraising event in Louisville. That was about 6 months before the pandemic began, so no worries there. That was lovely 2019. And I work with these fundraising events around the US to help them raise tens of millions of dollars. In fact, I've worked about 24 of these events. Cumulatively, they've raised more than $72 million, and I've created more than 350 live stream videos over the last 4 years of doing this. I've written my 3 books. Steve mentioned 50 States, 100 Days. We have the new book out, 15 Seconds of Fame, and we're going to incentivize you, I think, at the end of the hour here to pose some questions, and I'm going to hand out some of those signed books for you here before we get going. I'm a Forbes contributor, so I write about how nonprofits use social media effectively to drive results around the world. And I partnered with some of the biggest brands in the world, including Humana, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, and the Salvation Army. Am I doing okay on time? We're like 10 minutes in? Okay, perfect. And like I mentioned, I'm based in Greenville, South Carolina, which made it extraordinarily easy for me to get here this weekend from GSP Airport. So here's my last section of 3 keys to becoming a social media influencer. Because as I mentioned, each and every one of you guys, I think if you have a social media account, how many of you guys are on Facebook? Everybody? Okay, good. How about Twitter? All right, mostly everybody. Okay. Instagram? So I would say that everyone in this room already is a social media influencer to those who follow you and those who connect with you. Maybe that wasn't what you were expecting to hear from me this morning, but I think it's true. But here are my keys to really becoming an effective and scalable social media influencer. I want you to figure out what you both love to do and what you're great at and go all in on that. So when you're creating anything on social media, on any of those social media channels, understand what it is that your followers are looking to you for and create along that vein 100% all in, right? You can't, like you said, try and reach the masses, but you can go all in on what you do. And that's a screenshot of me having some fun with my microphone in my home studio, setting up and really creating a stage for those nonprofits. That was Give Local 757, which is Hampton Roads, Virginia. Had to produce that one virtually, but as you can see on that live stream, we were able to bring on 4 different nonprofits at a time and provide them that same stage and make them feel like they're the star of the show on that social media platform. I encourage you to be exactly the same online as you are offline. Do not ever try and be somebody different than who you are in real life. And I'm just so blessed that a couple of my friends are here, Christina Ritter and her dad. I think Christina would agree. I met Christina, she was my RD back in 2007, back in Mohawk Hall in CIW. Any CIW alums here? All right, shout out to you guys. Social media wasn't really a thing when I was a student here in Binghamton. And so growing up in this social media age, all I've ever tried to do on social media is be who I am and use these platforms to leave the world a better place than when I got here. And that's the same thing I've tried to do offline as well. So don't try and be somebody different, but just be that same compassionate and empathetic, energetic human being that you are, that hopefully I'll get a chance to meet a lot of you guys at the end of the program here. Be that same person online and it will translate really well. And I encourage you to think like a fan. What value can you provide to your specific audience, right? What is it that you are great at that you can tell people about in a scalable way? The platforms will take care of the scale. You just have to think about how you can expand on who you are and what you do. And you can apply these lessons either to your personal brand as a social media influencer, or as I'm sure Sydney will talk a little bit more about, using this from a business perspective to be able to drive those business results. And I'm going to give you this, my last slide here, Steve, a bonus. And this is what I always encourage every nonprofit that I work with around the country to remember. Know that your message can change and possibly save somebody's life. A lot of nonprofits are just too shy to go out there because they compare themselves, Steve, to these mega influencers that have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, and they say, I'm not Ninja, I'm not Charlie D'Amelio, nobody cares what I have to say. And I'm here in Binghamton, technically Vestal, sorry, to remind you that your message matters. That we are all social media influencers, and at the end of the day, hope this one works, we are all famous to a few people. And that includes you. Thank you so much.
Chris, thank you so much, and I enjoyed it all. In particular, it was fun to look at the slide with the TV set, because you'll appreciate this. Back in the day, the Seepersod House had a very large RCA TV that looked like the one on the slide, only instead of the dial to change the channels, we used a pair of pliers, because little Steve thought it'd be a great idea to quickly go from 2 to 9, and he had no level of patience, and the thing broke off, and after a while you couldn't glue it back together and fix it. So we're happy with the next generation of TVs had come out, no more of the pliers. Our next speaker is Sydney Sherman, a two-time graduate of Binghamton University. And this is a proud moment for me, especially because Sydney was one of my former students from when I taught the communications course in the MBA program. So it's great to have her back here on campus, native of the Binghamton area, and came to us from New York City, where she is currently working as a senior community development manager for Serhant. So Sydney, thank you, and great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm a little nervous because, like Steve said, he was my professor, so I feel like I'm taking a test right now. Hopefully I'm still very good at business communications, but we'll see. So thank you for the introduction. Super excited to be here to talk about all of the work that we're doing at Serhant. So I don't know if anyone here is a Bravo fan. Does anyone watch $1 Million Listing New York? Okay, cool, yes. I got some homework for the rest of you. Bravo is the network. $1 Million Listing New York is the show. Season 9, episode 1, if you see me and this guy up there, you're watching the right show. Essentially, what we do at Serhant, we are a luxury brokerage in New York City. So we sell luxury residential real estate. And we are 1 year old. We just founded this brokerage, and I was lucky enough to be on the founding team. Here's my clicker. So that's Ryan Serhant. He is the #1 broker in New York City, the most competitive real estate market in the world. One of the top in the country, and I would say by extension, one of the top in the world. And I'm lucky enough, like I said, to be on this team and to have grown this business with him. And one of the key ways that we've done that is through community, which I'm going to talk to you about today. So a little bit more about us at Serhant and our followership, just so that you know that I'm up here for a reason and I really know what I'm talking about with growing an audience. We are very popular, I think, by what Chris just shared with us. We are one of those, 23,000 that have over 1 million followers across the board. So feel free to follow us everywhere, jump that number up. But specifically what I want to talk to you today about is a division under the Serhant brokerage. So I work with Serhant Ventures. We handle all of the IP product monetization. So that is our thought leadership, it's our courses. We primarily service salespeople, primarily real estate agents, and we teach them how to sell better to earn what we call limitless livelihood, which is really just creating your own life for yourself through mastery of sales and whatever achievement means to you. And our Sell Like Serhant community is something that I've built up from the ground with my team. And this is what we've been able to accomplish in the 2 years that we've been running the program, which, yes, is 1 year longer than we've had the brokerage. So we have about 8,000 course members, community members for Sell Like Serhant worldwide. We're in 109 countries. All of the time zones are represented, which is a challenge as a community manager doing programs, but we're represented across all time zones. And this is the one I'm most excited about, which I'll talk to you about today a little bit more in depth. We have passed over $48 million in referral business just amongst our community members. To say that one more time for the camera, $48 million in referral deals. And I'll talk to you about how we've been able to build up that community. These are some of our members in our Sell Like Serhant community space. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit through our strategy, but I want to keep in mind that what we do really is we create a family, right? I want you to think of community very separately from social media where, we're kind of reaching the masses. Yes, we're talking about where we can provide value and we're trying to speak to, a wider audience there. What we're doing is we're creating levels, we're creating smaller subgroups of people who are incredibly engaged with our brand. And we create these smaller subgroups through community so that we can also invest back into their success. And these are just some of those community members that I very lovingly call the Serfam at one of our dinners that we've recently hosted. So what is community? If you haven't heard of this topic, that's okay. It's still relatively new, and it's not community in the sense that you might be thinking of it. And it's also not social media. I want you to think of community separately from social media. There's a difference between building an audience and building a community. I'm going to talk to you about how you can do that. Community has a capital C. It's concrete, it allows response, it has a platform, it's interactive, trackable, allows opt-in and opt-out, and it's leveled. So concrete is essentially saying that if we have a community, we know what that community's purpose is, right? It's a smaller subgroup of our audience, and we know what we're doing with them. There's specific programs, there's specific benefit to them, there's specific benefit to us as a business. Allows response. Now, if you're following someone on social media, right, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, you're likely not having a one-to-one conversation back with that person, and you're likely not having a one-to-one conversation back with other followers unless you've created your own sub-community, right? So having a community means that we're allowing response. We're facilitating a relationship from the brand perspective with your community members, and we're providing them the opportunity to chat with us, basically, to be involved in that community development, to be involved in our brand development. A place and a platform. Has anyone heard of the term third space? Okay, no problem. I'm gonna explain it to you. So I want you to think of a place that you go that's separate from work and that's separate from home. Your third space is somewhere where you feel like you're at work or you feel like you're at home, somewhere that you belong, but it's completely separate. Essentially what we're creating from a community perspective, and for me, digital, is a digital third space for my community members to congregate, learn from one another, grow together, and have conversations around our brand and around our programs. So that's what place and platform means. You're creating a space, whether it's in person, right? For us right now, we're in somewhat of a third space. We're all, by some extension, part of the Binghamton University family, right? For us, it's using social media tools to create that digital third space so we have a place specifically for our Salt Lake Serhant community. It's also interactive. So this is where that specific programming comes in, right? So I'm engaging my community members around my brand. I'm facilitating relationships, again, one-to-one with my brand through specific engagement opportunities within my space. It's very interactive. It's trackable, which means that I can plead a case back to my exec team about the impact that my community has on our business goals. But it's also trackable where I can see how we're performing and the programs that we're running are impacting either the business or just overall engagement of my community. It allows opt-in and opt-out. So one of the key differentiators of social versus community is that there is a very clear opt-in, right? For social, yeah, I can go give someone a follow. There's a little bit more intent behind being part of a community, right? So for us, we have a gate in front of our digital community. And in order to come and participate, there are some barriers to entry, most of which are just agreeing to our group participation rules. But you do have to willingly say, yes, I want to be here. I want to be engaged with this brand. I want to network with other people who are engaged with this brand. Sign me up. You also have a way to get out of that, right? So you don't ever want to imprison your community. You have to have opt-in and opt-out. And then there's also levels, which is what I touched on a little bit in that previous slide with our mastermind dinner attendees. But there's a way that you can continue to grow within your relationship with that brand through your community experience, right? So I have my brand new community members who have just joined, and then I have my community members who take on a bit more responsibility in that space. And I'll talk about how we can really leverage and work with those specific individuals in a little bit here. So community has a capital C, remember that. This is a definition of a community that I really stand by for my friends at ComSor. They are a leading community management platform. They say that because all communities are built with people, they're only effective, even for the biggest brands, when they have value from the perspective of the community members. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking those hyper-engaged customers, or for us, students, people who are interested in spending more time with our brand. We're creating a relationship with them, and then we're learning from them about how we can provide value, but we're also gaining value back from those specific members. It's a value exchange. And without that, you don't have a community, you have an audience. You have someone you're talking to, not someone you're building with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can create a business case for community, and also what a community can do for your business in terms of just general engagement, profitability, whatever it may be. There are five ways that a community can impact your business up here that I'll talk a little bit more in depth about. So first, we have customer support. We also have product research, growth and brand recognition, user engagement and retention, and then kind of at the cross of all of those things, we have brand advocacy, which means that we're building more and more people who are in strong support of our brand, who want to go talk about our brand, who want to recruit more people to come in and spend time in our community with our brand. And that's essentially like really what we're driving toward with a community strategy, is building more brand advocacy, but you can do it using all of these areas of focus. One thing that I do want you to keep in mind is that you can't do all of them at once. You can, but you can't really focus on all of those things at once. So community strategy will always lean toward what your biggest business objective is. But community absolutely impacts all of these areas of the business. And up here, I also have some identified teams within a business or focuses within a business where your community will be best serving. So if your community team sits under product and customer experience, you're likely going to be focusing on leveraging that community to build, to support your customers or to do product research. And if your community sits under marketing and content, you're definitely focused on growth and brand recognition, or you're also focused on user engagement and retention. So I'm going to go into a couple cases of some big companies that you might recognize who have used community and have leveraged it in one of those 5 ways. And I want, again, to keep in mind that brand advocacy is always growing if you're doing this correctly. So the first one, and honestly most of my examples because I am fully obsessed with the Salesforce community strategy. Erica Kuhl was the head of community. She now does independent consulting, but she built the Salesforce community into what it is today. If anyone is a Salesforce trailblazer, you might recognize her name, but here are some of the things that they did really, really well, and I'll tell you how that relates back to these business cases as well. So in the Salesforce MVP program, they generated a whopping 5 to 7% of Twitter mentions, right? So that might seem like a low number, but to generate all of 5 to 7% of all of the mentions of Salesforce on Twitter, that tells me that my community, my most engaged members, right, my MVPs, are starting conversations. That's huge. That's brand advocacy, right? So if I am investing back into my members and really building the value for them, building the value in that community experience and how we're working together, then I know that they're going to heavily impact my brand advocacy, how my brand is, communicated to people who might not yet be involved, and that's a huge investment for me, right? I obviously want that. This is word of mouth advertising, which everybody really loves because most of the time it's free. A next one that they did really well. The community answers about 80% of incoming questions, and the support reps wait 24 hours before they clean everything up. Now, this is incredibly important because what I'm understanding by this statistic is that my community members are empowered to work as my support team. That saves me as a business, representative, as a business owner, as someone involved in the support community of a business. That saves me the investment in having full-time staff that's going to come and go through all of these questions. Plus, it also tells me that I'm doing a great job educating my customers on their brand experience, especially if I am software as a service or a product where I need to continue pushing education. This was incredibly important for Salesforce and something that I also really focus on in the Salt Lake Serhant community, because Salesforce is a tool. If anyone out here has used Salesforce as a CRM, it's pretty complex, right? So they built their Trailblazers community all around learning how to use and leverage Salesforce. And what they had been able to do by really engaging that community is support incoming customers with questions. They would post them in the community. Really excited, knowledgeable MVPs came to the rescue of that person, answered that question, and it took a load off of their actual in-house support team, who could then hop in if something was a bit more complex. So that's a huge business case. This next one is incredibly exciting and something that we've seen also at Salt Lake Serhant. Salesforce community members spend 2 times more and have a 33% higher adoption rate than non-community members. When you're proving metrics in a community strategy, what you want to look at is how your community acts differently than all of your other customers, right? Remember that community has an opt-in, so not every single customer falls under your community strategy, right? It's those community members who actively want to be part of it, who actively want to contribute to it. by comparing those cohorts, right, my customers who are not part of my community against my customers who are part of my community, I can start to understand how they act differently and start to, again, build the case for investing more of my time and resources into creating efficient and, exciting community programming to keep motivating them to doing things like this. So we know that the Salesforce community members spend double what someone who is not part of my community is spending. And we also know that they have, again, the 33% higher adoption rate, which is incredibly impressive. And like I said, we have seen this impact in Salt Lake Serhant as well. We most recently had a mastermind dinner, followed by a day-long seminar. That ticket to attend this event was about 50 times more expensive than the membership subscription that we charge month over month for our community members. We ended up selling out that event specifically to community before we announced it to anybody else. We specifically promoted it to our engaged community first. We sold out the event at 50 times what they typically spend with us in under an hour. And that's because we invest back in them. Now here's someone that's not Salesforce to bring some business case diversity into this presentation, Duolingo. So in the past year alone, they've launched 39 new language courses, all with a team of less than 40. Now this is when I pulled this case. I don't know if that's exactly their year that we're in right now, but what they've been able to do here is empower their community to help them build product. That's where our product research arm of community comes in. So as I'm iterating product, if I want my community to advocate for the product that I'm putting out into the world, if I want it to continue to provide that value, I'm going to bring them in and involve them in that process. That's what Duolingo has been able to do. And because of that, they've been able to scale at this rate, 39 new languages, which is a huge accomplishment with a team of less than 40. Okay, so I don't know if anyone here would be responsible for implementing a community, but if you are ready to leverage community for your brand, I want you to just bear in mind this framework, the ABVD framework. You need to check for awareness, right? How are you going to promote that community experience? How are you going to encourage your customers to come and participate? Belonging is also something that you want to push, right? Belonging is a key component to community, especially to get that opt-in. You want people to feel like they're part of what you're doing, what you're building. How are you going to create that? Value exchange, again, this is essential. You can't have a community without value. How am I providing that value and how am I taking that value from my community members? And then also demand. Community does not make sense for every brand. So make sure that community really fits and can be authentic with what you're doing. And then I would suggest if you've checked all these boxes, go ahead and implement your community. But the one thing that I want you to all walk away from, if nothing else that I've said today is something that you remember. When you're building community, you always build with, not for. If you're involving your community members and you're showing them that you're truly invested in their success within your brand, you're doing it right. Do not ever just build blindly for your community members. It won't work. And then if anyone's interested in learning more, here are some additional resources. And thank you so much.
Sydney, thank you very much. That was awesome. And because you said at the beginning you felt like you were taking a test with a former professor here. You get an A++++, like in the Christmas story. So, yeah. On to our third speaker, Armand Khatri, class of 2009, and someone who is very, very passionate about what he does, but also very passionate about building alumni community within Binghamton. And so he works as a partner manager for Pinterest, as he'll talk about, but has been very involved with us at the Alumni Association in starting a group called the Binghamton Marketing Collective, which is an affinity group for alumni of Binghamton who work in marketing, communications, public relations, social media, and related fields. I can go on, and we're going to be over the time, so I'll stop there about what's all included in that. And as promised, he's going to talk about the overarching view of social media influencers from the collective sense. What's this all doing, and where is the ball going? Not just where it is here today in 2021. So Armand, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for sticking around with us today, and thank you to Chris and Sydney for setting us up so well. Besides working at Pinterest, my new role is at Tier Talks doing IT. So thanks for bearing with that as well. So today, I really want to talk a little bit about Michaela Souza. Who is Michaela Souza? I've been hearing about this woman. She's a virtual influencer. We're going to talk a little bit about her. We're going to talk a little bit about how did we get to the point where a virtual influencer, a CGI, is something that's actually acceptable and is followed so tremendously. And then we're going to see what can we learn about our own human nature based on what's happening around us. So before we fully get into it, as Steve said, I'm TVMC co-founder. While on campus, I started the chapter of AK Psi with a few other folks. My day-to-day job has always been in social media. I had my own company, Tracksuit, worked at Tumblr, currently work at Pinterest. I'm a fast-talking New Yorker, if you can't tell by now. And outside of that, I do a lot of things in the virtual space. So this is going to be crazy sounding, but I have a virtual architecture firm that I'm a co-founder of, where we build buildings for the metaverse. Companies have worked with us to have virtual office spaces. This is all insane, trust me. I don't believe it every day, but it's happening. And I think that COVID really accelerated a lot of these trends, which will be a recurring theme, right? So let's get back to the main star of the show today, Michaela Souza. I'm just here to tell her story. Michaela is a 19-year-old from California. She's Brazilian American. She speaks many languages. She has strong followings across the board. She's released 12 singles on Spotify. So, she's recurring about 1 million monthly listens on Spotify. You can see she has 3 million followers on Instagram. She has a big following on TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Twitter. It doesn't end. She recently released NFTs, so she's making sort of ephemeral content that's now living forever in the blockchain. So it's like this sort of weird dichotomy of what's real and what's not. And the craziest thing about it is, if we look at Michaela and what she's accomplished in her life at this age, being signed by CAA. CAA is a talent agency that represents Ryan Gosling, Reese Witherspoon, Kanye West, Lady Gaga, Beyonce. I mean, Michaela is represented by the same talent agency that represents Beyonce. I mean, that's crazy to me, And Michaela's a robot. Michaela doesn't exist. Michaela is a series of bits, not atoms, that make up, the rest of us in the room. So what's different from what Chris and Sydney told you about, the influence that Chris has, the influence that Sydney and the team for Ryan Serhant has, is that Michaela is made up. I mean, she's 19 years old, but is she anything? She's been 19 since 2016 when she was created. And this is pretty crazy. So Michaela and what she's doing brings up this topic of the uncanny valley. So a roboticist in Japan back in the 70s had this theory that whether you're looking at, puppetry, like puppet theater, or you're looking at, this was in the 70s, so he could never imagine that Michaela would have existed, or you're looking at some sort of robotic arm in an assembly line. It's really the movement of these things that make them feel more human. If you just see a prosthetic hand, for instance, and it's just sitting there on the table, you're like, oh yeah, that's a prosthetic hand, right? But thankfully, because of advances in science, prosthetic hands can now be controlled by, the person who's using them, and they could be controlled the same way almost as a hand would be controlled before. And that's what brings more life to an actual object. So the uncanny valley is this dip, right? It's this area where if you add movement to something, it feels more real, even though it's a humanoid robot. Whereas if it's standing still and static, you can not really relate to it as much. That's why when we see these robots put out by like Boston Dynamics and stuff, and they're, walking around, you're like, oh wow, that's like a little scary. And that scariness is, the uncanny valley taking its own form within us. But Michaela's been pushing boundaries in other ways. So recently, Michaela has been doing partnerships with a lot of fashion brands. And whether it's Prada, Givenchy, I always have a lot of anxiety saying Givenchy, or these other brands, she's taking over their Instagram. She's taking it over for like Fashion Week. She's interviewing celebrities at music festivals. I don't know how this is all happening, right? She's releasing commercials, and she's really reminding us that Michaela and other virtual influencers are doing what real influencers want to do, but they're doing it in a different way because they're only built for our attention. That's it. She has nothing else that she has to do in her life but take our attention. And when you look at an ad like this that she did with Calvin Klein, you see that she's here, and first you have Bella Hadid, who's an influencer, very much so in her own right. You have Michaela, and even though it's a CGI version of Michaela, they kiss each other. Now, you can imagine that this ad went viral online. There was a lot of controversy. The LGBTQ, some people from that community pushed back and said, what has Calvin Klein really done to support us? And yet they're putting this out there. And all I say to that, right, especially with my marketing hat on, is Michaela is engineered for our attention. And if that ad was not controversial, would it have gotten our attention? Maybe not. If Michaela was just wearing Calvin Klein, okay, Virtual Influencer does another partnership with, some brand. But I think that's what we need to remind ourselves of. But we also have to remind ourselves of the inherent advantage that a CGI has. She will never die. If we have great-great-grandchildren, they might be following Michaela on these platforms. So she is optimized for a following unlike any of us are. And that is insane. She also has an infinite wardrobe, a really small carbon footprint because she doesn't actually go anywhere. But she could also show up in 100 places at the same time and speak to everyone in their native tongue. And that's not something that I could do, Chris could do, or Sydney could do. It's pretty spectacular. So how did we get here? How did we get to this crazy point where there's 3 million people following CGI on Instagram and other channels? And I wanted to transpose the graph on Google of interest over time. I love fooling around with this Google Trends tool. It's so fun. Like type in a word or a topic like influencer. And when did influencer pop? It's hard to see, but if you zoom in a little bit, I'll do it for you. It's right around here is like 2015. And that's really when, influencer as an idea starts taking shape. People are searching for it. What is an influencer? How do I become one? How much money do they make? All those things. But we have to go back to 2007 because on June 29, 2007, Steve Jobs released the iPhone. And whether it was the iPhone or another device that would have took over, especially here in the States, the iPhone is really what allowed us to all be connected at all times. It gave social media all the downtime when you're on the bus, checking out at the grocery store, in a talk that's getting a little bit boring. It gave you all the downtime to check your feeds. 4G LTE was released a few years later, and I think that's the moment when the iPhone really came alive. It was able to process mobile internet unlike it was before, so it gave the iPhone a little bit of life. Only a few months later, Instagram filters came out. Now, this is the first instance, I think, where despite our own reality, our reality was not good enough. Our reality was boring. We wanted to take a photo that we just took and make it look better because we were optimizing for engagement the same way that Michaela does much better than we do, right? So when Instagram filters were released, I think that's the first time that we can say we were trying to become virtual because we knew that what we were seeing in front of us was not optimized for what we wanted to show the world. 2013, the word of the year, selfie, right? At Pinterest, we always say it's about yourself, not your selfie. You don't really post selfies on Pinterest, but selfies are a big part of most social media. And that's how a lot of people, garner attention, show off a new look, a new hairstyle, etc. Fast forward, Snapchat filters. Now this took the selfie and this transmorphed it into something of its own beast. For younger people to maybe feel more comfortable sharing their face. Snapchat was primarily targeted to younger people at first, Maybe you have a acne breakout and you want a little bit of a face filter. Snapchat filters allowed you to make fun of yourself in a fun way, and all of a sudden you became like a dog. And when you stick your tongue out, this giant dog tongue comes out, and it's fun, right? I'm sure you've all connected with like younger family members or children on using a Snapchat filter and having fun with that. But it's evolved into a different place. The same time Snapchat filters came out, this app called Facetune came out that a lot of young people pay $10. And when you're young, $10 is a lot of money. And that removes your blemishes, that makes you feel better. I mean, you fast forward to COVID, and there's been an 80% increase in plastic surgeries because of Zoom anxiety. We're not used to looking at ourselves that long. 80% increase in facial plastic surgery and like a 15% increase in plastic surgery overall. And that's crazy because we weren't going anywhere. Why are we so self-conscious? It's because technology confronts us with a mirror all day long. 2019, Lego did a study with the Harris Poll, and they surveyed 3,000 children ages 8 to 12. 1,000 in the United States, 1,000 in the UK, and 1,000 in China. In the US and the UK, 56% of these 8 to 12-year-olds, their primary ambition for what they wanted to be in their lives was a YouTube star. I'm sorry, it was 2/3, it was like 60-something%. In China, the primary ambition was astronaut, and that was 56%, followed by teacher. America has always been known for its media and our culture, right? Tell me another country where you are listening to their music and watching their movies as regularly as you are American movies and music. I don't know, for most of us it probably doesn't exist. And for a lot of people around the world, our culture and is one of our biggest exports, frankly. But you get to the point where so many people want to be famous that over the course of COVID, influencers, social media influencers on Instagram were renting space in fake private jets to say to their fans and their followings that they were traveling. Now I say this to sort of make fun of it a little bit, but it just shows how sick it could become to continuously put up a front, or another person, like a representative of yourself for a fan base. And I think what Chris said about being your authentic self online and in person is the only way you could possibly do this without going nuts, because otherwise it would just be too tiring to have two people. One of the other things that we led to Michaela for sure, because the founder Trevor, he definitely references Code Miko as a influence. Code Miko is a Twitch streamer. We heard about Twitch earlier with Ninja. And what she does is, whether she's playing video games or just answering questions from her fans, she built this technological rig that makes her face and her emotions control this character. She was tired of being judged on the way that she looked that specific day. So now she could become this semi-cartoon character, but as you can see in the top right photo, maybe not so clearly, she's making a specific facial gesture, and the cartoon character is replicating that. So there's still a human behind it, but it is a sort of technological layer on top to amplify who she is and to allow her to do what she does best, which is doing the stream. So what can we learn from this? And I wanted to put on 3 different hats because I'm a marketer, I work at Pinterest, I'm an investor, I have a small syndicate, and we're all just generally humans. So let me just talk about what we can learn as marketers. And I think what we can learn here is that trust is one of those scarcest digital assets. If you look at the Edelman Trust Index, which is a PR agency, Edelman, you can see that social media is actually at all-time lows in terms of trust. After a lot of conspiracy theories, really contentious elections, all things that have been happening, especially during COVID, it's been really hard to keep the trust of folks. And people much more so trust what their employer tells them, almost by 3x, than what they see on social media these days. Next thing we can learn is that influencer marketing isn't going anywhere. We are that middle bar. We're at $3.7 billion in influencer marketing, and that's only projected to increase over the next couple of years. As investors, we can learn that with success comes, mimicry and, copycats. Michaela's on here, but you know, if we think back, we could say that Mickey and Minnie Mouse were some of our original virtual influencers, you know, just from the IP. We could say that Tony the Tiger is an influencer. And recently, if you've seen these ads with Shaquille O'Neal, you know, you have Tony the Tiger, what used to be a 2D character when I was young is now this 3D sort of thing that's talking and eating a bowl of cereal with Shaquille O'Neal of all people. So there's gonna be more virtual influencers and we're gonna get used to this. Some of them are not gonna have that uncanny valley effect of looking human. Some of them will just be cartoons, but they will continue to exist. One that I wanted to point out is Shudu. Shudu, to me, is the first time that I saw a virtual influencer and I couldn't believe that Shudu wasn't real. Shudu was invented by Cameron, who's a fashion photographer and was a fashion photographer for many years. And all he did was take photos and then try to remove the human elements of his models to make them look more fashion magazine ready. So by knowing exactly what he would always remove on Photoshop, he was able to create Shudu, who, if you see this main orange image, she's actually doing a partnership with Rihanna's beauty line called Fenty. Shudu has, you know, surged in popularity, and to me, you know, if you follow her on Shudugram, it's very hard to tell in a lot of the photos that she's not real. It's pretty incredible what they've built. And then finally, as humans, I wanted to write a quote from Trevor. He was just saying in an interview that they, talking about Michaela and some of the other virtual influencers that they've created at Brud, his company, have a unique opportunity to direct people's attention and energy to the voices, creators, and causes that need it most. We've all known that media is one of the most influential places, right? And one thing that Trevor talks about is during the time that Will and Grace, does anybody remember that show, Will and Grace, that was being aired? A lot of us, yeah. It was a show about Will, a gay man, having a relationship as a friendship with Grace, who's a straight woman. And just, you know, almost like Seinfeld, just talking about nothing and everything at the same time. And after Will and Grace started coming on the air and getting such widespread distribution, that is what led to 2015's moment of allowing and recognizing gay marriage. So Will and Grace had a very significant impact on gay marriage being acceptable. Trevor believes that there's too often not enough attention focused towards the causes that need it most. And that's why Michaela recently became a social activist, and she's very, loudly supports Black Lives Matter, because it's just so important to direct more attention to some of these causes. So, to wrap it up, learnings, human creativity is friggin' astonishing. Michaela is very much so a 0 to 1 improvement than I've ever seen. It's not a faster car, it's a brand new concept of a virtual influencer, it's insane. Trust is the scarcest digital asset, and that's why a marketer could feel much more comfortable working with Michaela, knowing that unlike some other influencer, she's not gonna get pulled over on the weekend for a DUI, She's safe to work with. You know everything she's done, everything she said, and there's a team behind her that's gonna program everything she will say. And last but not least, attention is a currency. We talk about cryptocurrency a lot these days, but I really think attention is still the primary currency that's happening online. So thank you so much, and appreciate you staying around.
Armand, thank you very much, and certainly a lot to think about with these digital characters and out of the realm of actual humans being the influencers, and Tony the Tiger coming to life to talk with Shaq of all people, and not sure I feel about that, but it's quite an interesting concept. I know we're standing between everybody and lunch at this point, but just wanted to give out some gifts, so I've got gift bags for the presenters, so thank you. It's really awesome to sit here on the stage with you. It's just like, it's unbelievable, and to be able to do this program in person after so long of being, we're all trapped in Zoom, we're kind of just sick of being in the screen, and so it's great to be here. And then we want to give away Chris's fabulous books. So does anyone have any questions? Ask a question, get a book. That's how the game's played. Yes?
Yeah, so Chris, I'm the president of a small charity, and we're trying to grow, and we're finding, just Facebook for our target audience is really good. But how much is enough to devote towards the new message? Is it posting once a day, once a week? If you're someone that's trying to grow and say grow, 10%.
Am I on here?
I'm not hearing you.
Thank you. Hello? Oh, you can hear? Okay. Do you exclusively use Facebook? Or do you use these other platforms that?
For our demographic, it's where we have our most membership, and we've had some success with it, but I only have volunteers. So it's like, how much can I ask of them to go and post? Are we posting twice a day, or we lose our momentum?
It's an interesting question. I think you want to focus, especially on Facebook, more on depth over width. Facebook is one of those platforms where you definitely can post too much, and with the way that the algorithms work, and you've heard that there's hundreds of millions of other things competing for your attention, I would focus more on trying to create a content stream that is particularly valuable. Even if you're posting less frequently, make it something that your followers and your supporters really look forward to on a regular basis. I talk a lot about consistency being greater than frequency. So commit to something that maybe is episodic, that tells some stories, that really gives a consistent stream that new followers and existing followers can latch onto on an ongoing basis, and then measure that against the amount of resources that you have to create that on a consistent basis. So maybe it's one thing a day, maybe it's one thing a week, but make sure that whatever it is, it's something that someone's going to be really interested in and looking forward to see, whether it's every Wednesday or every weekday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Valky.
So it's a question for all of you. I don't know who can answer this. So recently I was in a panel. I was introduced to this word called jerk by Gen Z. It's not the word that you're thinking about. Jerk is the physics concept of rate of change of acceleration. Apparently, the world of social media, you don't talk about speed, you don't talk about velocity. It's jerk now. The speed at which things change are so rapid. So the question for you is, I live in the B2B world and we do all of this stuff. So how do I think about long term? I mean, when I do this stuff, I'm not running a business for this quarter, this week, this month. The attention span's going so low. I really worry about what is the sustainable message? How do we keep doing this? Are we supposed to keep stressing and be schizophrenic about this every week and saying, what's the new trend? How do we catch this stuff? That's the worry that I have at the generation and the kind of stuff that I'm doing right now. So I'm curious to know what you all think about this as marketeers.
I'm happy to start off here, but I think everybody else would have something to say too. I think what you should kind of steer away from is growth, right, on your social presence. I think that's the biggest thing that kind of makes everybody feel like you need to keep up with the Joneses and you need to stay on top of all these algorithms and you need to, continue seeing this same amount of growth. I would change your metrics and change what you're assigning value to internally. And that's by trying to really understand what actions you're taking are actually impacting your business, right? It might not be, showing up as frequently in an Instagram feed, right? By messing with the algorithm to change your post times. It's probably more about what kind of value you're creating in those people who are most likely to follow you and be a customer, or who are most likely to follow you and in some way invest back into your business. How are they reacting to what you're sharing? So I would kind of step back from wanting to, think about the algorithm, think about how things are always changing, and think about how you can get ahead of it, and instead think about how you can stay consistent, how you can continue providing value, and how you can reflect that back to actions your actual customers or very warm leads for customers are taking.
Less is more. That's really what it comes down to, is if you commit to creating something special, like I just said, on a consistent basis, you can be very successful just focusing on one or two of these platforms. I would never encourage anybody to chase the bouncing ball, because like you said, it will drive you crazy. It's impossible to keep up with everything that's going on. It really is. So just find something that you do well, commit to it, and make it your thing. That's how those mega influencers that you saw on my screen have done it. Mr. Beast just is who he is, and he's done the same thing but gotten better at it with each iteration that he's done. So just commit to continuing to do something that really represents who you are, but try and do one thing better at that each time you do it.
2 more books, 2 more questions. Glenn.
this is, I guess, somewhat connected to the reference for the Facebook discussion that's been going on, and more broadly than that. But it's always been an issue with marketing and branding, but in the age of social influence and social media, what responsibility do you think we, or even you, have in expecting your community that you're trying to create, or even working for good social causes as you see them, the responsibility of the user to not sit there and be influenced by what they don't even know might be a CGI and what that might mean to them? Isn't there, it's great to talk about even talking about depth, but don't we all have responsibility to go to the social media influencer and say, why am I being influenced? What am I giving up here? And what power am I giving up? And it's dangerous, and because we all see the dark side of it. How do you think about that in what you do, both specifically in your work, but in a broader sense as to what you're contributing to as you're trying to build a business, and say, well, that's not my problem, it's really society's problem, but you're living it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the idea of what is the responsibility of the actual user when all of us, let's say we're all upstanding citizens, right? I think we are. We're Binghamton alumni, so obviously we are. I think it's good to remember that when we see something, especially something that enrages us, or that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, to really take a step back, and we have to do some more fact checking. That is what we're learning here, right? We're learning that the things that make you feel good and bring joy are not the things that rank highest on a lot of social algorithms. So the things that enrage are going to rank higher on social algorithms. That means that you're going to spend more time on the platform, and that platform is going to earn a lot more advertising dollars. This is a big reason why I work at Pinterest, because we have a zero tolerance policy for a lot of these things, but I really do think it's the important, there's been much more of a narrative, and you can see on that Edelman trust graph that I showed, people don't trust social media as much as they used to, especially when they've only seen something on social and haven't seen it elsewhere. So honestly, I'm optimistic here. I think that by the time, hopefully I have children one day, right, and grandchildren and whatnot, right, hopefully by the time that I have children, I think that when they're growing up, social media is going to be a completely different aspect of their lives. And they're going to treat it the same way that you tune into TV for a little bit or tune out. But I don't think it's going to be nearly as invasive as it is now, because the generation that's growing up with this technology, even though it's a little murky right now, we're in a gray area, they're learning about all of its flaws from the beginning. So they know that when I see something on here, let me just talk about this with a few people and take it to another group, because I'm not sure if I could actually trust it. And honestly, that is a healthy dose of skepticism that we should probably all approach not just the internet with, but everything in life. We should just make sure that we have, double verify and get our sources right. So it's my take, at least.
I think, Armand, there's a distinction, though, in what you said between people trusting social media and people trusting social media influencers, right? And I talked about how we all have that individual choice to follow and really pay attention to those who we really believe in and trust. So yeah, it is definitely incumbent on the user to understand when you follow the power that you're giving to that person, that you're offering them. And I don't think, as someone who started undergrad without Facebook, we necessarily appreciated that as much, what it really meant to follow someone or to subscribe to something. You really are being influenced in every moment. And so I think, Steve, there's probably a reason why the three of us are up here. Sydney did a great job of talking about how to apply that influence that you have to achieve a smart business objective, and to use it in a way that is both healthy and productive, and not in a way that you definitely could abuse this power if you wanted to, and a lot of people unfortunately do.
Go to Marilyn quickly for the last question.
Have you done any help with the nonprofits in Binghamton with what you do with your company?
A little bit, yeah. So along 50 States, 100 Days, I stopped and worked with, I don't know that it exists anymore, with the Magic Paintbrush Project, which is a favorite here. I would be thrilled for anyone who's in the room, you want to talk more about your nonprofit afterwards. I'm not in a rush to get out, so I'd love to continue that conversation and offer some advice specific to what you got.
And that will conclude our program for today. So thank you very much for attending our Cheer Talk, and thank you to our three wonderful speakers.